in case you're wondering if there have ever been any parallels, any precedents to what we're seeing in the current administration at any other points in American history, the answer is yes. And I think the best parallel is with the presidency of Andrew Jackson. And I decided to do a deep dive inspired by the first 30 days of this current presidency. So here's what I've learned so far. My primary source for today's video is the biography, The Rise of Andrew Jackson, written by David and Jean Heidler. It is a well-written book with a lot of detail, and I'm listening to the audiobook, and it is very well narrated, so I highly recommend it. When I was looking for a biography to absorb about Andrew Jackson, I came across a lot of very admiring and glowing biographies of him, and that was not my vibe. So this book is doing what I need it to do, which is break down exactly how this guy got into power and what lessons we need to take from that. So my takeaways from the first third of the book, about a third of the way through. Andrew Jackson came to national prominence as a general. He first served in the Tennessee militia and then got posted in some national conflicts and became a general in the U.S. Army. And he first came to prominence during the Creek War, which is a war between the Creek Nation and the United States government to displace the Creek from the southeastern United States. They are native to Alabama and Georgia. Those are their homelands. And during this conflict, they were defeated and displaced. And this is horrifying and despicable and sad, but it is par for the course in American history. This is how we treated all tribes. But Andrew Jackson's conduct is striking in a couple of ways. First of all, he participated in some massacres, some wholesale slaughter of men, women, and children. And during one of these massacres, there was a young child left alive whose parents had been slaughtered by Andrew Jackson and his army. Not him personally necessarily, but certainly someone who was a part of his fighting force. And he kidnapped that child. They would say adopted. I'm going to go with kidnapped. It feels more appropriate. He took the child, brought it home to Tennessee, and his wife raised it because she was childless herself, was not able to bear children. And so they adopted this child, but adopted just doesn't seem like the right word. So that was mind-blowing. So there's that disturbing piece of history. And then as the war with the Creek Nation ended in their defeat and they were forced to negotiate the ceding of all their territory to the United States government, and they were forced to relocate off of their ancestral homelands. In the making of the treaty between the United States government and the Creek Nation, Andrew Jackson sent one of his toadies, one of his, inner circle, out to survey the territory that was to be ceded to the United States as a part of the Creek War settlement. And he gave this man instructions to add to the war treaty territory that was controlled by the Cherokee, that was not under the sphere of influence of the Creek Nation. Now, Indian nations traditionally in the U.S. territories did not claim land the same way that Westerners did. So they didn't have deeds, they didn't have surveyors, and there weren't these hard lines. And so it was more of a sphere of influence of between the Creek and the Cherokee, and there may have been some pieces of land where the two tribes overlapped, but the places where the surveyor was going were very, very clearly and definitely in Cherokee control. They were part of Cherokee Nation's territory. And this was very, very definitely a land grab of some millions of acres that Andrew Jackson orchestrated. And the Cherokee saw these United States land surveyors, and they knew the outcome of the Creek War, and they knew what was happening, and they were like, this is BS. And so they went to Washington, D.C., and they said, hey, there are people trying to take our land as part of this peace treaty. Can you stop them? And a federal judge said, yeah, this doesn't seem legit. Andrew Jackson, you and your surveyor need to stop this. But the federal judge, assumed that it was an honest mistake. And he said, we do need to stop and not add this territory as part of the treaty. But, if you want to negotiate a purchase of this land from the Cherokee, the United States government should do that. But basically said, hey, you can't do this. You need to do it in a legitimate way. And Andrew Jackson had that man arrested. He had the federal judge arrested. And the federal judge backed down, and that territory was ceded to the Cherokee. That was taken from the Cherokee as part of the treaty that ended the Creek War. Now, the second piece of history that this biography touches on, which I think is wild and I had no idea was the case, was that as a part of what they now call the First Seminole War, Andrew Jackson himself, as a general of the United States Army, decided to invade Florida. He just decided to do it. Now, I'm not saying that maybe the president, James Monroe, or the Congress at the time weren't planning on invading Florida at some point. This was Spanish Florida. And it was definitely a territory of Spain, but Spain was pretty weak in this time period, so they may have been deciding to invade Spain, and Andrew Jackson was in the area. So it's possible that that's what they were planning, but he just decided to do it. He was in the area and he just decided to do it. And he, in so many of these instances, like with the end of the Creek War and with his decision to invade Florida, he's just taking advantage of the fact that he's on the frontier, and communication in the early 1800s is very, very slow. And so by the time Washington hears about him invading Florida, it's already been done, right? And President Monroe was infamous for being slow to make decisions and a bit dithery and a bit milquetoast. Like, he wasn't gonna send anyone out to stop Jackson. When he got news that Jackson had invaded Florida, he pretty much reacted like, wow, that would be, if that's true, that would be bad. Was essentially his reaction. Was like, wow, I mean, yeah, if that's true, that's not good. So he decides to invade Florida. He occupies Florida. And the United States government decides to back him, I'm sure partially because it would look bad for them to admit that they have this rogue general, but also because they were kind of like, well, we would like Florida. And also because it was popular. That's the thing, like, him invading Florida was popular. People liked it. And because it was popular, it didn't matter that it wasn't legal. Because it was popular, didn't matter that it was illegal and undemocratic.